thanks everyone for. Oop, not loud enough, is it? Is it loud enough though? Or is it just my voice? Mate, could you try hitting sorry about that. The yellow, yeah, the bass. Just the yellow line actually. Channel number 4 or 5 is it? With the yellow cable. The yellow cable going into it over there. Yeah, the yellow one. Yeah, that's it. How's that? Is that better? Cool, great. So thanks everyone for sticking around. It's certainly impressive to see so many people sticking around. I think obviously it says maybe more about our own anxieties relating to this stuff, which were so astutely presented in the film itself. Obviously, we're just going to have what you'd maybe traditionally call a panel, but with less of the kind of staging and structure that you might be used to when you see a panel. This panel will be first and foremost about you guys and your questions. It's more of, in fact, a format for getting to the heart of our anxieties regarding this stuff and asking the questions, whether they be technical questions, whether they even maybe are just raw emotional responses, but particularly with the view to how we can get engaged and where we can take this challenge from here. You know, what are the limits of our freedom of movement? What are the legal shall we say restraints that might stop us getting involved, and whether we should adhere to them or not, and what's the situation particularly here in Germany, where I assume most of us actually live. I guess I'm going to start just by asking the panelists here. I've never done this before. I've been on a bunch of panels, but I've never moderated a panel, so I'm just going to ask a few questions to each of the panelists and allow them an opportunity to introduce themselves in relation to this given topic. And I'll start with you, Lukas. Lukas is a very active lawyer. At the moment, he's engaged with one of the most, shall we say, hot topical cases regarding this very problem here in Berlin. In fact, I myself used to live on Rigaerstraße for a couple of years. I lived just down the road from the squat that has been, you could certainly argue, a victim of a great many organised police efforts to evict the inhabitants of that squat, those people living there. In those 2 years that I lived in Rigaerstraße from 2006 to 2008, I had no problem at all with the squat, yet I remember it was framed in the media at the same time as being a threat to civil society, here and there. I know that in the 13th of January in 2016, 500 police raided that squat with the help of the SEK, which is, I guess I'll get you to introduce in your own words, the SEK. They had a helicopter, that they've done extensive, I think what's referred to as asset forfeiture, or seizing in English is a common word we'll use. So they break into a place and take stuff that they may think is to be used against the police or the general public. Some of the things they were taking included the little fire, I don't know what you call them, like these little stein, these little carbon coal things, that they needed at that time to keep the squat warm. I guess you're also, however, involved very much in the upcoming G20 in Hamburg. What's your forecast for Hamburg, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the SEK and your experiences.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me and for the introduction. These are two things. Well, first, Rigaerstraße is, I think we have to say, it's more than just this house. What's interesting about it is what they installed and called Gefahrengebiet, freely translated as danger zone, maybe, around that area, around 1 square kilometer. Last year, it was around half a year installed there. Officially, it's still installed, but at the moment, they don't really do like they did it before, which means that in this zone, everybody can be controlled without any aspect or any thing that the people have done before. So anybody could just be controlled at any time. And that meant also for the people living there, like you did, that they could be controlled anytime during the day, during the night, while going shopping, leaving the house, visiting their children, whatever. You could just be controlled anytime, and it took hours and hours. The controls, also young children were controlled. So that was, I think, more than just a squad which was like involved in this situation with the police. Speaking about G20, what are we going to expect? They had a try in December where they sent a lot of police already there for OSZE, I don't know the English word, to have a first try. I think there are going to be like 10,000 police officers probably, so the area is going to be full of police, and they are going to have new vehicles called Survivor, which are like in the middle of police cars and tanks that will patrol the area. So I think they're already building a free air prison in Wilhelmsburg, which will have the capacity for around 500 prisoners. So this is what we are going to expect there also for the moment. Thank you.
How could the police there, in that massive representation of police, what are the kinds of things that they could do? Could they use tear gas, for instance, or zip ties?
Sure. They are prepared for this. In Hamburg, traditionally, the water cannons are quite strong, so they always use water cannons a lot. They have brand new water cannon cars. They will also use it. In Germany, I'd say they have a different police strategy. It's not just like a far fighting, but they go more into the crowd and try to arrest people, diverse, go inside with police. They call them BFE, so that's like special capturing forces. They go inside the crowd and try to arrest people, try to push them out. So this is what they usually do.
And Matthias, at the little private screening we had in the party the other night, we were talking a lot about these special forces. You mentioned, I think, the GSG 9 and the BFE plus there, and you also wanted to speak a little bit about the German border and the kind of incrustation, if you like, of police authority on that border. Is there anything that you could talk about regarding comparison to the sort of SWAT team culture, if you like, in the United States as regards a German reality?
Yeah, when we had this discussion, I was more like stressing that you cannot really compare it with Germany, so what you've seen in the film, because in Germany we have a totally different tradition of police and military and secret service as well. So after the Second World War and after the experience with the Weimar Republic, there was, for example, no legislation for state of emergency. This didn't exist in Germany until '68. So also at the beginning there was no army, so that started slowly. But there was a highly armed police force in that time. And that was also foreseen in case of civil unrest, in case of riots, to operate in the interior. That was changed in '68, so with the students' movement that also was very popular in Germany. They made a legislation, they made a new law that allowed the military to operate in the interior. Notstandsgesetz was the German name. In case of war approaching, in case of internal emergency, whatever, state of like Notstand, and in case of whatever catastrophe emergency. And this law to allow the military to operate in the interior led to the fact that the police was demilitarized. So this highly militarized Bundesgrenzschutz in that time, that was a kind of paramilitary force, over the years was like no taking the automatic weapons, the armed vehicles, armored vehicles, stuff like that. So until 2005, when they transformed it into a total civil police, let's say like that. So you have a tradition of like non-militarized police, but of course you have also aspects in which the police is kind of militarizing. So I would not mention, I would not see these armored vehicles that you said to be a symbol of a militarized police. It's like each police force. I don't know if you are familiar with the situation in Germany, that you have the federal police and the federal states. So you have 16 federal states, like countries, and they have their own police forces. They are responsible for police affairs, but there is one federal police as well that could be deployed at the borders or train stations, and sometimes also in case of demonstrations or bigger events. And so the local polices, like the Länder police, they now acquire these armed vehicles, but each of them buy one. So you have 16 countries, federal states, and not all of them take part in that program. I don't know, it's about 8 or something of them, and each of them is buying one. So you cannot really compare this with the MRAPs that you've seen in the film. But of course, you have a kind of militarization, I would say, in terms of surveillance, for example. But this is not so much happening inside Germany. This is more happening at the exterior borders. In terms of, they will use drones, for example. And I'm talking about the big ones. I'm talking about the Predator and Heron drones that in summer will start to operate in the Mediterranean for Frontex, for example. You have satellite surveillance that is used to detect small boats of migrants try to leave the territorial waters of Libya to hopefully not reach the Italian shores. So this kind of technique, for example. You have highly sophisticated command centers that every police force is buying from the military industry. So these kind of, all these techniques that were meant to be bought by the military are now sold to the police. But this is a kind of a different kind of militarization. So maybe later in the discussion we can talk about it. So what is militarization of police? Is it military operating as police, or is it police operating with military weapons? For example, in Germany, I would more talk about well, I don't know, I only know the German word, like Vergeheimdienstlichung, so the police operating like a secret service. This is much more an issue than operating as military.
It's interesting, I think it was the criminologist Klaus Beer, maybe, Beer. He said that that the BFE plus would be a tremendous assurance to the public that seeing patrol vehicles that were armoured, cops that look like they might come directly from the battlefield, would in fact be a source of comfort, would help to ease the anxiety. And I think that itself says a lot about the vast gap, the distance between the way it's understood from statecraft as to how it's actually perceived on the ground. I don't know anyone myself, and I know a diverse variety of people both here in Germany and around the world, I guess, that would necessarily feel comforted by the sight of armoured vehicles patrolling their street. It would always be a source of anxiety of some kind, even if it only indicated that there was a great threat. Could you mention one or two things maybe about that vast gap between the rationale or the logic, the kind of rhetoric behind pushing the BFE, for instance, as to how it's perceived? Where does that come from? That discrepancy.
I mean, the discussion about building up more specialized police forces, we call it SEK, Spezialeinsatzkommando, like special units, now comes from the terrorist attacks. So this kind of BFE plus that you mentioned before. But I would also not really say that that this is a kind of militarization. So this is more a brutalization of police. So of course I'm scared of them as well. If I see them on the street, if they come in formation with this riot gear, looking like turtles, of course it is good to scare people. And this is explained under the terrorism experience. But you also have like, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago they started to change the color of the police from green to blue. And it was explained like, well, this is this makes them more serious. So the people will take them more serious. And they also changed the hats. They are now looking more like US style that have like, that cover a little bit more from the eyes. So they look a bit like dangerous. Stuff like that.
The sirens being changed as well? The actual sound of the police cars?
Not yet, but there is a discussion.
To be like the American.
I mean, actually, I lost the plot a bit. I'm not sure if it's still under debate, but there was a debate about that. And then, of course, they changed not only the colors, but also the look, a little bit the behavior that you explained. I mean, the German police or the Berlin police, for example, is very much known to operate within the crowds. So they train that in the 1st of May, and they export these tactics also to other countries. As I heard, Greek comrades explained that, well, after the Germans were here, they are now kettling. We never had that, for example.
Angela, you've spent a lot of time in protests, maybe more in the past than now, but you're very familiar with the culture of protesting here in Germany. I was surprised to read that, at least regarding Riga 94, that there was this amazing scene, for instance, last year where police took a man out of the crowd during a so-called riot, out of the crowd, and then beat him up, punched him and violently in front of his children while filming. And before I came to Germany and when I travel, German police have a reputation for being a bit more moderate. Some even refer to them as maybe being ants or part of an algorithmic kind of a self-organizing system, not necessarily emotional or part of a culture of humiliation, you know, that you'd maybe find more familiar in, certainly Italy or Spain, where I lived in Madrid. That was incredible. And in the US, have you seen a change over the years in the way that police organize themselves as regards organizing a large body of people? Do you see this kettling, like stimulating trouble, you know, in order to identify, for instance, who would be a ringleader of a protest, or to make arrests more acceptable within a German legal system?
Well, I have to admit that I protested a lot in Hamburg in former years when I was younger, and there it was, well, nearly a folklore, I would call it even. And I didn't do it anymore in the last years so much, but I'm still in contact of people who do it a lot, still from around the Rote Flora and people like that. And and I've followed it somewhat, and I think, yes, indeed, some things have been said here about, and even about the appearance and everything. I think it's getting more brutalized, and definitely what I hear from the protests from Hamburg specifically is that the escalation level is much higher, that even police is kind of trying to very much not de-escalate the situation, but operate with fear, and also, like, it's actually the opposite. Like you said in the beginning, when you see militarized police or brutalized people, you dehumanize them automatically, and that causes anxiety. So for me, it's unbelievable how someone could think that's a good strategy to decrease fear, you know, because that's always the same dynamic. I'm from former Yugoslavia, and I also experienced not very much, thank God, but some time in the war, and that's the first thing that happens as something that you have to do is cause bubbles for people where they live in and have a certain reality to dehumanize the other person, to see it as an enemy. And that's also exactly what happened, I think, in the film when we saw the police training, and you see them in this bubble of we are the good ones, and the grin on their faces when they spring the first time. It's like a Abenteuerspielplatz for men or something. I don't know. And then you see the reality of it, and also these grotesque scenes where they come to this family where they assume drugs, and the discrepancy of how they come there. Like it's like they come to fight ISIS or something, you know. And in fact, there is a baby there. They didn't find any drugs, and it's so unreal. But all this, I mean, okay, this is very extreme. I don't think that it's in Germany the same level. But here there are definitely aspects, and it's always this weird thing that you dehumanize the other one, and also appear dehumanized more and more. And yeah, I'm a theater director, so I'm very much more interested in the dynamics of psychology or emotions that come into play, and they are very important, I think.
Definitely, it's clearly happening already. I saw a photo just the other day. I think it was of a Chicago cop that is wearing a new edition of helmet, which is entirely reflective. In protests, quite often, also here in Europe, one would hold up a mirror to the police so they could see their own face within the scene. You know, within the that they could develop some subjectivity in relation to where they are, to take them away from that being a mere sort of pawn, if you like, PAWN inside that structure. But now wearing just a completely face blanking reflective surface, where the protester sees her or his face reflected, is another aesthetic, almost a theatre. And in fact, talking about the militarization of police, borrowing from military rhetoric, one talks about a theatre of battle.
Yeah.
You know, there's a common word, the theatre of war. You know, and there is this sort of staging. There is the scripted behaviour, and there are very much props. You know, it's interesting to think about how much of it is externally and aesthetically implemented, and how much of it actually is related to real utility.
Yes, it's true, and also it operates like a mask. That's also what makes it theatrical, and it's interesting. I only once did a play with masks. It was an old Greek play, and we worked with masks, and it changed a lot, of course, you know, because behind a mask you can be more free in a way, but you can also do stuff that you wouldn't do. And of course, this could be used positively in a way, but often it can just enable you in the context of police to. I mean, I was once robbed in France, classically by two people coming with a Vespa, and they tried to rob me. And what was most frightening for me is that they were wearing their helmets, so I couldn't see their faces, and they tried to take my bag from me, and I got into a fight with them, actually, because it was not about the money in the bag, but there was my passport and all this stuff that I really didn't want to give away. And so I fight hard, and in the end I won. But I was really frightened because of the mask. But maybe this also gave me a lot of adrenaline, so I was, you know. I think it's a strong aspect how people look like, and this. But then there's also another aspect that I wanted to say, because actually I'm not really an expert on police like you guys. I was working a lot in the last years on mass surveillance, and this was also in the end of the film. It was also coming into perspective, and this is also something which is very frightening. And in the US it's already happening, but I think it's actually transnational more and more, and also these merging of the military and the Geheimdienste, the intelligence, and the contractors. That was also mentioned, and that's everywhere. You have that with mass surveillance, that you also have all these weird firms that people don't even think or know that they exist. Everything in secrecy and money being, and there's always the money, you know. It was also here mentioned that they actually after 9/11 pumped so much money in it, not only in the intelligence community, obviously in the police, and I found it even strange, didn't you, when somebody like Senator Paul, yeah, who is a Republican. I mean, he was one of the guys also heading for being president in the primaries. He was even a voice of reason in this context, you know.
Well, it's a very interesting point, in fact.
Yeah.
While toward the end of the Bush administration, the Bush administration was actually defunding the COPS and the burn programs, both of which were the programs built up to militarize the police, if you like. I think by the end of the Bush administration, there was 175 million a year being given to police to buy things like bayonets and rocket launchers and, you know, anti-aircraft sort of like guns and things like this, tanks. But when Obama came in his first year of term, he pumped $2 billion into the burn program and the COPS program. He also reinvigorated, but no one really noticed because they associated 9/11 with Bush but in fact it was in Obama's administration that a lot of that money came in. And of course, Obama was very much responsible for institutionalizing mass surveillance, which you were talking about before, and exporting it a lot. This is maybe a good bridge for you. You're the only American on the panel tonight.
Don't you know it's America first?
America first. I've heard that before somewhere. Yeah.
Just kidding.
So one of the things that comes up a lot is that you know, we can see the weapons. The weapons are tangible objects that are within the realm of vision. They're corporeal. One can see the cop with the submachine gun. You know, we can talk about drones as things that we maybe know from websites or we would see in movies, etc. We can see a tank, obviously. We can see handcuffs, but it's these. Your area of expertise in machine vision, racial profiling, how you can turn the way someone walks into a fingerprint that can be used to identify them, regardless of how they are maybe masked later. Perhaps you could talk about that in relation to what you know of both the American situation and maybe what we could expect.
Yeah. First, thank you for having me here, and that was an incredible film. Yeah, I will say, maybe to tie it in and not to be necessarily critical of the film, but just to point out an example. So there were a number of people that were blurred in the film that either had their complete face blurred or partially. There was text appearing in TweetDeck in one of those scenes. I would say that 50% of that information could be de-anonymized, either through some kind of neural network technique or the various ways to go about undoing and de-anonymizing those people. So I think that's, you know, a lot of my research kind of artwork lately has been about what are we giving away when we allow somebody to take a photo, or when we post our own photo, when we share information from a protest, when other people are taking photos of protests. Because it's so cheap. You saw that scene with the guy in the pocket thing. I mean, I calculated to store one person's life, 1 year, 24/7 at 480p at a decent bit rate would cost $28 to store that on Amazon. So that's, you know, the price of one dinner compared to owning somebody's 1 year of life, audio and video. So, yeah, there aren't many reasons to not collect and store this information, and there aren't enough laws to protect against doing it. So it is either coming from above, from private companies, like you saw persistent surveillance systems that have come out of military programs, or it's people on the street uploading those photos to Flickr. So it's a no-brainer that those photos are used and are scraped. There are programs, and one of them is called Janus from IARPA. But this is from 2013 is when they made that public. So this is years in the making. I mean, anybody who works in data science knows how easy it is to scrape information from public sites, from social media and so on. So I'm on this panel, I think, to answer any questions that people would have about the capabilities of facial recognition, license plate scanners, possible countermeasures that I've explored in my own work. And this does, as you pointed out, really relate to the militarization, because you have a tank is something that you can clearly point out in MRAP and so on, but it's much more difficult to point out the dangers of surveillance, kind of so-called information warfare. And so there's this interesting paper I came across called Unrestricted Warfare, which is from 1999. And it's actually from 2 Chinese Air Force colonels in the PLA. And what they talk about is an alternative strategy to military, intercontinental warfare that doesn't look like war. So the idea is not to destroy somebody in warfare, it's not to kill somebody, it's to control them. And this is what information warfare is about, and that's what you saw an example of. The company Persistent Surveillance Systems is an example of that.
And obviously now all of that vast institutionalized surveillance infrastructure has been handed directly to Trump, which would then afford him with a tremendous arsenal of tools, of weaponry, obviously, to then use against any dissent of any sort in the United States. But what I find particularly interesting is you made the comment about that the law is catching up. I mean, one of the reasons maybe that the law is always catching up is because you've got so many different contractors. You've got this relationship. I mean, almost Google operates that way. I mean, without going down that road, but you implement something first, have a coffer of money, if you like, a bucket of money, to fight the civil lawsuits. But then you're always ahead of the law. The law is being written literally in your echo, in your footsteps. Do you see this as something that's even remotely stoppable from the perspective of machine vision? I mean, it's obviously, I remember a couple of years ago you showed me some imagery, some work that you were doing with thermal imaging, whereby you could see right through someone's clothes and see the silhouette more or less of their body. You'd see where their heart was beating, et cetera, et cetera. This is obviously a tremendous breach of privacy. The law can't possibly be ahead of it because it's so unfamiliar with the technology.
I mean, just as an example of the rate of technology, every 1 second, 8 trillion transistors are produced. And so to keep pace with that technology, all of the impacts or the capabilities of what technology can do anymore. And that is indeed a problem.
Well, that's a lot of scope right there. To mention, we're committed to a gender balanced representation, and unfortunately it couldn't be quite so balanced tonight. Elke couldn't make it at the last minute. But yeah, let's open this up for questions. The questions can be asked in German, French, or English. Christelle would do the translation from French to English. If someone else is a French and German fluent speaker, then we'll just improvise. I mean, it's just people got drinks in their hands and it's a casual affair. So let's pass this mic around. If anyone has an immediate question to any of the panelists or to the panel in general, just shoot. Christelle's going to pass that mic.
I can speak English if
yeah, go for it. Yeah.
It's just about when you were talking about the militarization of the police in Germany. I'm not sure about it. Like, you still don't have any army in Germany, do you? No, army. I'm talking about an army.
No, of course there is an army, but after the Second World War, they started to build up the army that was limited by the Allied forces to have a German army, and in that period the police was supposed to act like an army. For example, in case of war, in case of any other country would attack Germany, this police force was meant to defend the country, and so it was highly militarized. It was seen as a competent. It had a competent status like the army, and when they made this law that the new build-up army in that time in '68, so that was 23 years after the Second World War ended, when they made the law that they would be allowed to engage in the interior as well, this led to the fact that for 30 years this police force was more or less demilitarized. And then it started again kind of remilitarization.
But did it get like demilitarized because in between there were some kind of official army?
Yeah, I mean the army was constantly built up. So now we have an army of, I don't know, like.
No, because so the thing is, like, when you say that it's scary to see policemen that are more and more militarized, like in France, it is scary to see actual military guys walking in the street. You know, like our police officer kind of, I think, have maybe few stuff more, but they still look the same quite often. But we have like guys with, but it's because of the attack as well, as I can understand. What is more scary is like in the US, it's more about just global things. That's why I don't know if in Germany it's only about the attack or if it's just because also we have this global kind of extreme things that is growing up everywhere. So,
I mean, you have also different weapons in the army and in the police, for example. Like the army, the German police, they don't have snipers, for example. The French police has. So, and there is also a difference between some countries that have the so-called gendarmerie forces, which France, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, Portugal has, and the gendarmerie, they are operating as police. Like in Italy, it's the carabinieri, for example. And they act like police. For example, Carlo Giuliani at the G8 in Genoa was shot by a carabinieri. But they belong to the military. They have a military education. They have military weapons. They have military vehicles, like kind of military, no? And so I would consider them to be a militarized police force. But this, for example, in most of the countries in the European Union doesn't exist, like in Germany.
Hi. I have, my questions are twofold. I would like to ask, I think your name was Angela? Dwayne, hi. I'm pretty much interested in how you would perceive the effect of entertainment industry on the global, or on the public perception of how normal it is to be actually militarized. I've seen a vast increase of elements in both music videos, for example, distributed to teenagers mostly, and children, but also in movies, the Hunger Games being an example, for example, where you kind of get the picture that it's not pro-militarization, but it's also not really against it. It's very cool, very fashionable to wear army attire, plated armor, to be a bow shooter, like an, how do you call them? I forgot the word for it, like shoot with arrows and all that shit, and how you would perceive the effect on the public perception of being militarized and not even getting it. Like for example, there's an Adam Lambert video where he parties, everybody's partying, and a riot police is kind of like partying with them, but also not, and it's a lot of like lasers and smoke screens, but they're all colorful and neon colored, and everybody's having a blast, but also not, because in split seconds there are flashes of surveillance cameras, of all the elements that make us feel like cringy and not comfortable of the scenes that we are witnessing in the video, for example. And I feel like children and youngsters are not able to distinguish this as something that is preparing them for a future where some elements in society, and I don't want to say that entertainment industry is in the hands of the global conglomerate of evil men, but maybe it is, and it feels like something is
Yes.
off when you need to educate children into being fine with being surveyed and being controlled and being maybe even beaten on a party or whatever, like wherever you
Yes.
go. And
It's extremely brutal. I totally agree, and I feel bad about it that I have to agree, and because I don't believe in conspiracy theories that there is some brain behind it directly, but there is something about it, and I changed my mind about it, because years before I always was arguing that art should be free and pop is pop and people can distinguish. But I have to admit, I totally changed my mind about it. And I agree, it's often in the videos, I find it extremely brutal, also how easy and funny it is to kill, it means nothing. And it does have an effect on people. I mean, I see it on myself, and I'm an adult, and it's again, the dehumanization, the definitely. And also another thing, I agree with all the examples that you named, but also very intelligent series, let's say Homeland, or this film by Catherine Bigelow. They are so sophisticated that you don't even realize how much you are brainwashed into a logic that says torture is okay, because it's not done by the evil, ugly man, but a woman, very sensitive woman, and she
woman.
cries.
So, yeah.
White, and she cries while doing it, and she really doesn't want it, but it's really necessary, And this is so, it's so sophisticated, and the series are so well made. It's not stupid, that I really think, wow, it's very hard to not believe that there is some weird plan behind it, preparing us for some dark times, It's, I don't, oh God, I really sound like a conspiracy theorist now. But I was thinking a lot about it, and I'm somebody who also tried to manipulate people by doing art. But I tried to make mass surveillance feelable, because it's so abstract. I mean, you see these things, military is at least visible somehow, but mass surveillance isn't, and so I tried to somehow get to the audience and to get them feel it and see it, and to a certain degree I succeeded. So I know it's always about emotions to manipulate people. And I see this coming from the American culture industry in the last, I don't know when it started, but it is happening in a way. And maybe it's just happening automatically in a way because of a weird conscious shift that people think it always has to be more and more radical and somehow shocking, and but on the other hand, it makes a very bad effect on people, I think. And what is scary about it, like I said, is the intelligence and sophistication, and that you kind of, even if you recognize it and reflect on it and see, I'm now being manipulated into thinking that torture is really a good thing. It's the same like you would say rape is somehow okay in some cases. It's never okay. And it's the same with torture. This is, this is something that is no debatable, in any case. But they make these things that, somehow shift it. And even when I watch it, I'm totally manipulated, even if I reflect on it. So it's a powerful tool.
In English we call it normalization.
That's
Yes.
what I was aiming at.
Yeah. Okay.
May I, as I said, twofold, I'm sorry. I didn't get your name at the beginning when the young man in the middle. Yeah, Matthias, hi. I wanted to ask you how you see, or whether you think this whole mentality of them against us that I, for example, read about a lot about, in terms of how the American police forces is being riled up and trained to deal with the public. This mentality of actually going into conflict against people instead of into a conflict for the protection of people. How much this is being condoned in the German police force, maybe from higher up executives, or even the politics that we don't get to know about. Like this, we get to be told that they are there to protect us, and that's why they have to be harsh and aggressive. But I sometimes have the feeling that's not what they are being told. I have the feeling like stub them out, get them quiet before they get nosy and loud and want to have answers that they actually deserve as the public. How much of that would you think is valid as a point? Is it that they are being riled up against the public and there is a sort of camp building them against us, which results in dehumanization and normalization of violence, of course?
I mean, I think it's a question that you could better respond to, like Lukas. I mean, on the street or at the eviction. So I don't know. I mean, the enemies change, no? And in recent years, in the last 2-3 years, for example, leftist extremism, as they call it, is not such a threat anymore. I mean, of course, all the structures will continue to fight left activism, stuff like that. But I mean, I see that the public discourse is much more on Islamistic extremism, terrorism, and all the structures that are built up. But they could easily be transformed against left-wing, right-wing, whatever, as needed. I mean, it was, for example, I guess you noticed the NSU, this kind of right-wing terrorist group that murdered 10 people. And as a result of, so when this came out and it was a big scandal, so the German government was like, okay, we will have to react. We now make we will now create a special center on right-wing extremism. And a couple of weeks later, it was like explained, well, so if this center will be created, then it will engage as well against left-wing terrorism, extremism, and Islamistic extremism as well. So it will be an anti-extremist center. So, but this is like more theory. I mean, from the streets. Maybe you can respond better.
I mean, just what I was thinking about is, I think it's quite normal when you imagine you being a police officer and your friends are police officers because of your shifts that you do night shifts. Your friends, everybody, your partner, they are police officers. You don't have a lot of contact to other people. Then you start working in the morning, maybe 4 o'clock, you start with your team being in your car and you're being prepared by your superior to the next arrest, whatever you're going to do. So then you are together against an enemy, and this is what police, mostly like SWAT teams, those police teams that are like heavily uniformed and armed, they only have themselves. So this is how they are being confronted with the world, I have the impression. And I think it's a structural problem. Like in Germany, before we had a rule that every police officer must have had another job before they could even work as police officers. They stopped that, and now people come to the police when they are 17, 18, start to work there, and never had any other experience in their life, don't have any other friends. So this is how they, I have the impression, see the world. And I have the impression that in Berlin, it's not just Islamist extremism, like you said, but it's just like young migrants that are the enemies of police. They come to Wedding and they have the impression they are our enemies. These streets are full of our enemies. We have to be together, to be strong together, and we don't talk bad about each other. Even like if some police officers would hurt or shoot someone, other police officers would never say anything against them because they just are one team. And yeah, I think it's quite normal that this happens. Well, it's structural, definitely, and you get good cops, good results by that. Sure. I mean, everybody, like police witnesses, giving testimony in court, they're always prepared they know the file, and in important cases, the superiors come to them, talk to them, prepare them for the case and what to say. Sure, it's wanted.
I don't think the U.S. is such a shining example. So yeah, I can only kind of speak to what's not working, which is mass incarceration. I think this question though is better handled from a European perspective. Oh, we're all out.
Yeah.
You've had a question? All three batteries that you've been giving us here don't work. So anyway, could you try? Yes. Good. Use it. You know, let's take this mic.
Okay. Can you hear?